Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar hosted by the Greenwich Hospital Medical Library. My name is Veronica, and I'm the Consumer Health Librarian at Greenwich Hospital. So we have all finally made it to May. I hope everybody in attendance is giving themselves a big pat on the back for that, because it has been quite a challenging year. And for those who may not be aware of it, May is actually nationally recognized as Mental Health Awareness. And for those of you who do forget that, that's behind me right there. And when I was thinking of a webinar topic to discuss this month, I chose something that we already incorporate into our daily routine. We spend a third of our lives doing it, so we can only get better at it. And it's also something that I find is misunderstood and overlooked when it comes to the impact that it has on our mental health and well-being, which is getting better sleep. And we are very fortunate enough to be joined by Dr. Saul Rothenberg, a clinical psychologist and sleep medicine specialist working here in Greenwich Hospital, who can help explain the nuances and latest research into sleep medicine. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rothenberg.
It's my pleasure, Veronica. Thank you for inviting me.
And we hope, to all the attendees here, we hope to give you a better understanding of the importance of sleep, as well as for you to take away some of the recommended resources that we will be giving about getting a better night's sleep. We've got websites, we've got books, mobile app recommendations. So hopefully you'll come away with something out of this. And as you can tell by the post-it note on the bottom of the screen, we will be having a special focus on insomnia tonight. And we will not be offended if anybody falls asleep during this presentation, because that's kind of what we're going for. So no hard feelings. And just to give a brief reminder, this session is being recorded. So if you are unable to stay the entire time, or if you know somebody who wanted to go to this webinar but couldn't make it, this is being recorded, and I will be posting it on my website as well as Greenwich Hospital's social media pages. And you can definitely take a look at as I mentioned earlier, I gave out a handout for people to use as reference and for note taking, but if you have not received that, I will be, you can email me for that. And lastly, we will be having a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. So please save your questions for the end of the presentation. We really appreciate it. So as a disclaimer for all of my webinars, this presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. Please consult with your doctor or other healthcare provider for medical advice before making any lifestyle decisions that may impact your health. All the resources we are talking about tonight are meant to provide a productive discussion between yourself and your healthcare provider, as there is not in Medicare, in the medical universe, there is not a one-size-all solution for everyone. So it is better to consult with someone with expertise. And then last but not least, all images used in this presentation are sourced from reliable health websites or are under the Creative Commons digital license, which means they are free to use. So just a brief overview of the topics we are covering tonight. We will be using the internet to find why sleep matters and provide relevant statistics and studies that answer that question. We'll also be talking about insomnia. Like I said, that's going to be our special topic of focus for tonight. Where to get started when it comes to educating yourself online about sleep. We will also be recommending sleep and insomnia education websites, as well as books, mobile apps, and we will also be talking about the services that the Sleep Disorder Center at Greenwich Hospital provides, of which Dr. Rothenberg is a member of. And we will be ending with some general tips for better sleep and overcoming insomnia. And these are just two resources I'd like to just point out. For all these websites that I'm recommending, I use the resources that are on the Dr. Stephen Mickley Community Health Resource section to evaluate them. So for those of you who want to be more confident in your searches for health information in the future, I highly recommend checking out those resources on that page, as well as the Trust It or Trash It worksheet. So a little bit about me. My name is Veronica, like I said, and for those of you who do not know what a consumer health librarian is, I basically help people find health information that they would have otherwise not had time to go over with their healthcare provider. This can be information about a diagnosis, an upcoming surgery, medication, or just something general like nutrition and exercise. I have a master's in library science from Queens College. I also possess a consumer health certification from the Medical Library Association. The three basic tenets that help me do my job is by promoting health and online literacy, basically helping people to better understand the health information they find online or otherwise, helping people live better lifestyles by doing things that prevent you from going to the hospital in the first place and by encouraging wellness, and also to help advocate for the patient, as the patient can take charge of their own healthcare and make better, more educated, informed decisions. And I do really care for the patients in this community because I'm a resident of Greenwich myself. And one of the two ways I've stayed sane during this pandemic is to walk and listen to audiobooks. So Dr. Saul Rothenberg is pretty well known in Greenwich. He has done Insomnia lecture before for the Greenwich Retired Men's Association. But for those who may not know you, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am a psychologist, sleep specialist, and I've been at Greenwich Hospital for over 20 years. And I was working at the hospital when the sleep center was founded in the late 1990s. Some of you who've been living in Greenwich for a long time will know the doctor who started the sleep center. He was a pulmonologist who retired, which is why I said was, Dr. Stuart Macaulay, and became a sleep specialist like myself. And he and I worked together until his retirement. He specialized more in sleep apnea. I specialized in the more behaviorally managed sleep disorders like insomnia, circadian rhythm sleep disorders, and sleep disorders in children and adolescents in general. So we were a good team, and we have a new medical director, Samit Malhotra, who's a neurologist, sleep specialist. He's now my medical partner. And we have a pediatric pulmonologist, Hussein Sadeghi, who handles the sleep apnea in children. So we're a full service sleep center, and I've been doing this for over 30 years. So I've had quite a bit of experience with sleep problems.
Yes, I'm sure you've seen it all at this point in your career. And has your influx of patients been more as during this pandemic or less?
It's a great question. I switched from in-person visits to Zoom visits with some hesitancy because I had not done that before. And I was quite surprised at how well it worked. And I think it's because of the face-to-face component of Zoom. And what I noticed is at the beginning, I was just bringing along the patients who I had been seeing in the office. And business has really increased over the course of the year. So whether it's directly related to the pandemic or not, it's hard to say, but certainly there have been a lot more people interested in dealing with sleep problems than there had been in the past.
Yeah, and as someone who is a licensed psychologist as well as someone who specializes in sleep medicine, I'm sure you of all people would know how interconnected mental health can be with how you sleep. So very, very good set of credentials to have, I think. And what you all do at the sleep center is really great, and we'll definitely get into more detail towards the end of the PowerPoint. But now I would like to engage all the audience in a little interactive activity, just to get a sense of what everybody already knows about sleep. Because like I said in the beginning, it can be a little bit misunderstood. So it's good to know what our audience already knows about it. So for those of you who have not done it before, there is a chat box in your Zoom toolbar. So you're just going to click that and then simply type in true or false when I bring up a statement about sleep. So for instance, The first one is adults sleep longer as they get older. So you go in the chat and just simply type in whether you think that is true or false. And there are no, and don't worry about getting it wrong. There's not, you're not going to get graded on this. So I'm just curious to see what everybody's responses are. So far we have false. Okay. There anybody else typing in? True or false? We got 18 other responses. This is the chat section right here, in case so that you guys can see where it is. This is the chat. You just type in true or false. And you can set it up to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So far, I've gotten just one false. So I'm going to assume that that's what everybody basically thinks. And if that's the case, then they are correct. It is actually false. And we will be talking about that in more detail later, but the National Sleep Foundation actually created the set of recommended sleep durations for all ages, and for, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Dr. Rothenberg, but from about 18 to, anyone over 65, the number of hours you need is between 7 and 9 hours.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yes, and that's actually less than what you would expect as when you're first born, for instance. That's about 14 to 17 hours, I believe. Yeah, if my memory is correct. And we will be going over that later during the presentation, but good on our attendees for already getting one correct. So how about we move on to the next one? So the next question is, your body gets used to getting less sleep. Is that statement true or false? So if that wording's a little bit confusing, your body gets used to getting less sleep. Basically, you don't have to sleep. If you keep not sleeping enough, then your body's just going to get used to it and you'll be fine. Okay, so we're getting a false. All right. Anybody else? I see Nancy G is answering. Good job, Nancy, for responding. Anybody else able to respond, true or false? I'm not sure if there's an issue with the chat, Al, but I'm only getting one person's response.
This is opened up to everybody.
Okay, so people don't want to answer, that's fine. But thank you, Nancy, for answering. And you are also correct. It is false. And I think I'll let Dr. Rothenberg explain a little bit about why, because I know it can get a little complicated when it comes to sleep deprivation. But Dr. Rothenberg, why is that the case that that will be false?
So there are two basic reasons. One is that your need for sleep is a genetic trait that you're born with, and it doesn't change except for the decrease from childhood to adulthood. And there's some debate about that, which we'll talk more about later, about what happens as you get older to sleep need. But the second reason is not only do we need sleep to be awake the next day, but there are a lot of biological functions that are synchronized to getting a whole night's sleep. So even if you could fool yourself into thinking that you could be just as awake with 2/3 of the sleep that you really need, the functions in your body aren't going to be fulfilled the way they would if you had a whole night's sleep. So it's really playing with fire to get less sleep than your body requires.
Yes, from what I've read, serious health problems can actually accumulate over time if you get less sleep. So that is quite a concerning thing to know. So that's why it's really important that people know that this is a false statement. Next, we have a sound sleeper rarely moves around at night. Anybody want to guess whether that's true or false? Or we have someone in the, I think, doing the hand raising symbol, but Nancy G, you want to guess this again? Oh, okay, we got somebody else this time saying false. Okay. All right, anybody else? Going once, going twice, and it is false. So we have a sound sleeper rarely moves at night. That is actually a false statement as well. As we're going to be talking about later in the PowerPoint, when we talk about the sleep cycles and the cycle of sleep, excuse me, that minor movements of the body are actually considered normal as your body is reacting to the sleep cycle. So we'll get into more detail. I think that's actually the next slide. So I will save that for that part. Next, we have the statement, naps can help make up for not sleeping or having no sleep at night. Anyone want to take a guess at that? Is that true or false? All right, we got one true. All right, we got somebody in the Q&A. Okay, so that maybe that's where I'm missing it. Oh, somebody's telling me my chat has a problem. I cannot send my response. Okay, that might be an issue then. I apologize if I wasn't able to see anybody else's answers to that, but we're just gonna go ahead, speed forward, and just say that that is also false. I think some people are starting to notice a trend now. And I'm gonna leave this also to Dr. Rothenberg just to briefly describe why that's false, because when I talked to him earlier about this, it can get a little bit complicated. So Dr. Rothenberg, take it away.
So this one really is tricky because it's actually true that a brief nap can help you be more awake for a short period of time after the nap. But there are several problems with napping, and one of them is it certainly can't make up for a whole night of no sleep. That is pretty devastating to most people, and even a restorative nap would not help you do that. And we actually do recommend naps for people who work night shifts to be more awake at night. So under certain circumstances, naps can be beneficial. But the problem is probably twofold. One is if you take a nap too late at night. In other words, if you were to take a nap after dinner, even right after dinner, and then try to go to bed at 11 or 10 or 12, it would make falling asleep more difficult. And you also only need a certain amount of sleep per 24 hours. So if you get sleep during the day and you have a problem sleeping at night, the napping during the day is going to make the difficulty sleeping at night worse. So, this is one of those questions that the real answer is it depends. So sometimes it's okay, but often napping can make sleep problems worse.
Well said. Yeah. So it depends on the person. So what I really should have written there was it depends. All right. And one last one before we move on. If you have trouble sleeping, stay in bed with your eyes closed. Now, who thinks that's true or false? True or false? And then we can move on to the rest of the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. Oh, sorry, I think I took that away. And I think we have another Q&A response. Yep, so somebody said also false. Okay, so just for the sake of time, we're just gonna move forward and say false. So I wasn't trying to trick all of you. This is all false because these are all myths that were compiled by the National Sleep Foundation, the most prominent myths that circulate when it comes to health information about sleep. With regards to having trouble sleeping, sleep experts actually recommend you get out of bed if you can't fall asleep within 20 minutes. They say that it's because they don't want you to associate the feeling of frustration with bedtime. But I'm not certain if that's the whole story, Dr. Rothenberg, but
yeah, so that actually is an important part of the story. But it really starts with the idea that sleep is a biological activity that gets associated with the place that you do it. So if you think about the ideal scenario where somebody spends almost all the time they're in bed sleeping, then their bed actually gets associated with sleeping and becomes a sleep promoting object in that individual's life without you even realizing it. So to the extent you spend any time in bed not sleeping, and resting is not sleeping, then you are weakening the connection between the bed and sleep, and you're actually building a connection between the bed and being awake. And to make it worse, as Veronica mentioned, if you stay in bed too long trying to sleep, it becomes frustrating, and that makes the time that you spend in bed awake and frustrated even worse.
Exactly. All right. Well, if for those of you who want to learn more about the common myths that are associated with sleep and why they are incorrect, you can definitely check out the link below and see what the Sleep Foundation has to say. So we're going to move on to the next slide, which is sleep and its stages. And as you can see from this handy chart, there are stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and rapid eye movement, although it is a little bit complicated as to how many stages there actually are. But this is the best infographic I could find because it goes into detail about what exactly happens, how long each stage lasts. And based on this chart, it's actually showing that these stages occur multiple times during the night. So the cycle repeats itself over and over the course of, 8 hours that you're spent sleeping. So just to quickly define what sleep is, which is information that I received from the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. We've mentioned this several times in the last slide that sleep is as essential to survival as food or water. It's biologically embedded in us, and it involves several structures in the brain and the releasing of specific chemical messengers. So when you suddenly feel tired all of a sudden at the end of a long day, that's your body telling you that it needs to serve its biological function and get some rest, because sleep is found to impact all systems of the body and able to create new connections in the brain and can help with concentration and memory function. With the 2 types that I mentioned already, which is the stages of sleep, the non-REM, which is stages 1 through 3, and then the REM, which is the rapid eye movement. And we wanted to avoid getting too technical with what sleep is. I highly recommend checking out that link up here from the National Institute to see exactly what structures are involved and what chemicals are released, because that is really fascinating in itself. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go over it tonight. So why sleep matters? The American Sleep Foundation can answer that. Because according to the American Sleep Foundation, more than 1/3 of American adults struggle with getting enough sleep. And 50 to 70 million Americans have been already diagnosed with a sleep disorder. And this is based on statistics based on before the pandemic even occurred. So it's probably even more so right now. In terms of more local and just state statistics, the Connecticut Department of Public Health released a behavioral health risk survey, I should say, that found that 2/3 of Connecticut adults got less than 8 hours of sleep per night when the survey was done in 2018. And it found that the participants that completed the survey were adults 18 to 34 years old, 35 to 54 years old, and those with more than a high school diploma that showed significant greater prevalence of inadequate sleep. And I'm not sure if that's primarily what your clientele consists of, Dr. Rothenberg. Do you find that to be the case?
Well, actually, there is a difference between how much sleep people get and complaints about sleep.
Yeah.
So the kinds of people who show up in my office are people who are trying to sleep better and have been struggling with that for months to years. So that necessarily involves a reduction in sleep. And if you look at the people, we're going to talk about this shortly, but if you look at the people who have problems with sleep, it turns out that there are more people in the older population with short-term and long-term problems with sleep than younger people. But you can have difficulty with sleeping at any age. But we can talk later about the difference between insufficient sleep and insomnia, or being too awake at the wrong time.
Exactly. So, well, with regards to sleep deprivation or short sleep duration, there are several health risks associated with them. And they include an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity, an increased risk of drowsy driving, especially during daylight savings, which the National Sleep Foundation has a lot more information on, an increased risk of depression and other mental illness, And what I found really interesting was an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And I highly recommend people actually take a look at this article by the National Institutes of Health. They published this a while back, but it's sleep deprivation that increases the Alzheimer's protein, which is the metabolic waste product that can be found in the fluid between brain cells, which is fascinating to me, but also like something that I think more people should be aware of, considering the number of Alzheimer's patients is only rising in America today. So I highly recommend everybody take a look at that when they have free time. So COVID-19 and sleep. The National Sleep Foundation has provided a whole section just on that, by specifically stating that sleep strengthens the immune system and improves antibody response. So it's kind of their way of promoting getting the vaccine, because the COVID pandemic has been linked to higher cases of what's been known as coronosomia, which is coronavirus plus the word insomnia. And I don't know if that's a medical term. I've just been noticing that in all the articles I've been getting in these websites, but I have not found a study yet that has said that term. But what I have found when I looked at studies that specifically link it to anxiety and depression is that it's due to an excess of screen time, because right now, how we're doing a Zoom webinar, but I'm sure you've been Zooming for work and other activities as well. Stress-related fatigue, just from the changes in your normal routine. Isolation through social distancing and quarantine. And like I said, changes to daily routines, such as working from home, as opposed to maybe going to work in a specific location. Something they call doom scrolling, which is constantly looking at the news and seeing new updates, as well as just the general upset that can be caused by cancellations of vacations, plans, even going out for the night. And all of this in general has the chance to disrupt what's known as a circadian rhythm. And Dr. Rothenberg, can you briefly describe what those rhythms are?
So one of the best parts about sleep is that we have a timing system that promotes being awake for about 2/3 of the day and then actively promotes being asleep for about 1/3 of the day. And those two components cycle for your entire life. So we all tend to sleep best when we match our attempts to sleep with the position of our biological clock. And usually the only time you have this kind of rhythm is if you fly across enough time zones that you're out of sync with it. And being out of sync with your biological rhythm for sleeping is sufficiently important that we have a whole syndrome called jet lag that is nothing more than being temporarily desynchronized from your biological clock's sleep position. And the wonderful thing about biological clocks is that through the action of sunlight in the new time zone, your body resynchronizes by about 1 hour per day in the new time zone. But if you are engaging activities late at night or get too much light in the evening, the position of your sleep phase can shift later. And then if you try to go to sleep at the usual bedtime and your body's not ready for sleep, you can lie in bed frustrated, waiting for your body to enter sleep mode. So that can be the beginning of a sleep problem.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of travel, I haven't done that in over a year, but jet lag is definitely something that I do not miss about it, for sure. But it's nice to know that how interconnected that is with just our circadian rhythm. I did not realize that. So just like the poster on the side of this slide shows, getting enough rest before and after your vaccination can actually increase your antigen response. As this article from the Journal of Internal Medicine will show, sleep as restitution. If you just quickly get a glimpse at this. When it comes to reading these kind of articles, you don't have to worry about reading the whole thing. I have this handy way of getting to what I need by just searching for the word vaccine in here and being able to just see what it says about the impact that it has on the immune system. And in here, it does say that the vaccine is specifically in this case, it was the influenza vaccine, and people who had a lot more sleep before and after the vaccine was given were able to recover. Were shown in the samples taken afterwards that the antibodies were more heavily responding to the vaccine. So I would definitely recommend checking out that article. And also, if anybody's hesitant about getting the vaccine or skeptical that it works, it could be a good way to persuade them to do so. So the recommended sleep durations are based on a survey and study that were done, a landmark one that was done by the National Sleep Foundation a few years ago. And I know that it may be a little bit difficult to read, but as we spoke about earlier, the older you get, you can see the less amount of sleep that you need. Anybody over 65 and from 18 to 25, to over 65, you need between 7 to 9 hours. And then as opposed to when you're a newborn, 0 to 3 months, you need between 14 and 17 hours. The orange is the recommended range, by the way. This infographic from the American Sleep Foundation is a little bit easier to read, and it has the exact same information on it in case you couldn't see this one. And then we have this handy chart that I got directly from Dr. Rothenberg, normal sleep and normal aging, sleep efficiency. And could you explain just a little bit of what's going on in this chart?
Sure. So we started to talk a little bit about this before, but what we're looking at here, I don't know if my mouse will work. Can you see that?
Oh, I'll move it. It's from my computer, so that's
okay.
So what do I have to go over?
So what we have here are the blue squares are men and the yellow circles are women, and this is the percentage of time that you're sleeping compared to how long you're in bed. And you can see in the younger decades in life, that percentage is about 95%. And as we get older, we tend to spend more time in bed awake, and that lowers the percentage of sleep that you get compared to how long you're in bed. We call that percentage the sleep efficiency. So the more hours of sleep you get compared to how long you're in bed, the better your sleep efficiency. So just using 8 hours as an example, if you were in bed for 8 hours but only got 6 hours of sleep, that would be a 75% sleep efficiency, which is below average. If you were in bed 7 out of 8 hours, the sleep efficiency would be about 84%, which is getting close to normal. And if you did a really good job sleeping, so you were sleeping for 7.5 hours out of 8 hours in bed, which means you fall asleep in 15 minutes, you wake up once and you fall back to sleep within 15 minutes, that's a sleep efficiency of 94%. That means that you have a very strong connection between your bed and sleep, and you're sleeping most of the time you're in bed.
Interesting. And I can see that also it's actually quite varied between women and men. Is there a particular reason for that?
So it does have a potential explanation here in middle age, where the women were actually doing better for a few decades, and then they fall below the men in their 40s and 50s. And this is probably related to perimenopause and menopause, which is one of the risk factors for sleep disruption that women have that men simply don't have.
That's unfortunate. So some of the sleep changes that will occur as we age, as Dr. Rothenberg pointed out, is earlier sleep schedules, increased awakenings and arousals during sleep, which will obviously decrease the sleep efficiency percentage over time. Less sleeping time in general, like as we saw in the recommended duration, it is lesser. And reduced sleep efficiency, as Dr. Rothenberg described. And I think the general idea behind it is that you should consider it to be normal as you age, to have less sleep and to wake up more often. That's, while some people might assume that that's an issue that they might have to consult someone about, it's just meant to reflect that it's a normal part of the aging process, if I'm to understand correctly, right, Dr. Rothenberg?
So you're right within limits, and you know
Okay.
it depends on how much you're talking about. So a small decrease in the amount of sleep that you get, as long as you still feel fine during the day, is certainly currently considered normal as we get older. The most reliable change in sleep as we get older is the increase in the number of awakenings. And because it's common for people to sleep through the night and think that it's just one large block of time with no interruptions, when they start waking up in middle age and older years, they may construe that as a problem. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and worry about the fact that you're waking up in the middle of the night, basically the only thing you can do is prolong the awakening. And then you're off to the races with a potential problem in the middle of the night. But that smaller amount of sleep, if you stay in bed the same length of time, will result in a reduced sleep efficiency. And that's not necessarily a problem. Again, the real telltale for how you're doing is how you feel during the day. So one of the interesting things about the sleep field is although we concentrate on getting people better, higher quality sleep, our real goal is for people to be fully awake and functional during the day. So that's really the important outcome measure, is how you feel during the day.
Well said. And we didn't even go over the fact that there might be other conditions that someone might have as they get older that might keep them awake, but that's obviously a discussion for another time. So now we move on to our special topic and focus of the evening, which is what is insomnia, and we will briefly describe what that is. It is difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep, or being too awake when sleep is desired. And according to the National Sleep Foundation, about 10 to 30% of adults live with insomnia. And again, that statistic is before the pandemic occurred, so it's probably even more at this point. And there was a recent study, and well, not recent, but it was fall of 2020, that has shown that it's a very common neurological outcome among COVID-19 patients, meaning that a lot of COVID-19 patients have been seen to suffer from insomnia. So if you know somebody who is having trouble sleeping and just recently recovered from COVID, that might be the reason why. So according to Dr. Rothenberg and all the resources I've seen, there are usually two types of insomnia: short-term, that occurs less than 3 months, and chronic, which occurs 3 times per week for 3 months. And the causes that have been highlighted for insomnia are usually in the categories of physical, whether it be like from serious illness or from some kind of pain. Pharmacological, maybe it's the side effect of a medication that somebody's taken that they are unable to fall asleep. Psychiatric or psychological, meaning it can come from any type of anxiety or depression that someone might have, or any other mental illness, or just the regular stress that comes with everyday life, or any kind of major life changes. And I can't think of a bigger major life change that has occurred that everybody's universally feeling than the pandemic, but obviously it can be other sources. And over time, chronic insomnia will significantly impair concentration, memory, the ability to accomplish tasks, enjoyment of relationships, and the ability to handle stress. So it's definitely something that somebody will want to consult someone like Dr. Rothenberg, especially if it's chronic. Would somebody be able to see you if it was some kind of short term, or how? I'm curious as to how it's diagnosed, as opposed to something between short term and chronic.
So, you know, in a very real way, insomnia is a problem that is self-defined, meaning that if your sleep is interfering with your function or enjoyment of life, then you have a problem with sleep. And that is something that is addressable. And I think the most important thing is for people to understand that short and long term, of course, more people with long-term problems come to see me than short-term problems. But it's important for people to understand that all of these problems, regardless of how long they've existed, can be addressed effectively with the current tools that we have for resolving sleep problems. And It's much more common for people to have short-term problems. So the short-term or transient insomnia is in the ballpark of 30 to 40% of the population every year. The people who have chronic insomnia, which exists for more than 3 times a week for more than 3 months, that's about 10 to 15% of the population. And as I mentioned earlier, this is actually much more common in the population over the age of 65. So these complaints are more common with people as they get older. And sort of the good news about that number is that it turns out that it's really the accumulation of these unfavorable conditions for sleeping that would cause difficulty at any age that accumulate as we get older that probably accounts for why older individuals have more frequent complaints about sleep. But the same group of people who established the higher frequency, which is about 40% of older people complain about difficulty falling asleep and getting back to sleep, they also analyzed why that might be so. So they looked at unfavorable conditions in life, like serious illnesses, anxiety, depression, stress, the death of a loved one. And they found that when you eliminate the contribution from each one of those things that would cause difficulty sleeping at any age, and you were left with just age as a factor alone, it turns out that age as a factor alone is not any more related to difficulty sleeping than it is at any younger age. So, the bottom line is that older people are just as able to respond to the interventions we use for sleeping as younger individuals, and it's the same process of analyzing the features of somebody's life that are contributing to the sleep problem that lead to the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like looking into all aspects of life, both physical and mental, in order to determine the best course of treatment. And we will definitely be talking about treatment options towards the end of the PowerPoint. So we'll definitely get into that in a few slides. I did want to have Dr. Rothenberg briefly explain this really interesting looking wake promoting process, because it does feature heavily into how insomnia interacts with your circadian rhythm.
So this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about an alternation of your biological clock for about 2/3 of the day, increasing alertness. So these orange bars are increasing, and that's the awake phase. And then at this point, and this is a fixed point in time, the blue bar, your brain stops promoting alertness. And then for the rest of the day, for about 1/3 of the day, your brain is decreasing alertness. And this is extremely helpful because as you're going through the day being awake, you're building up a need for sleep. That's the pressure to sleep or the biological need for sleep. And then when you're sleeping, that need is discharged. So as the need for sleep is increasing, your brain is increasing alertness. As the need for sleep is decreasing, your brain is decreasing alertness. And all of this is automatic, and it's based on clock hours, which is why regular hours, as simple as they sound, are so important for sleeping well. Now, notice this bar over here in the middle of the awake phase that's lower than the others. That's not an accident. That's actually a biological feature of our biological clocks. And it's a really interesting feature because this dip in alertness is actually an opportunity to take a short nap if you didn't get quite enough sleep the night before. And this has a fixed time. So it's 12 hours opposite the middle of where you sleep at night. So let me give you a couple of examples. If you slept between midnight and 8 and the middle of your sleep was 4 a.m., the next day at 4 p.m., you'd have a dip in energy. Now, if you got less sleep than you needed, the dip in energy at 4 p.m. would be stronger. The dip is always there. And usually you don't notice it if you're doing something interesting. If you're doing something boring, you might notice the dip more. But in Italy, Spain, and Mexico, they've actually incorporated this dip into their cultures. So at 4 p.m., they have siesta time. And it's a normal biological activity for people who don't get quite enough sleep at night between midnight and 8. If your sleep was earlier, let's say 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the middle of your sleep was 2 a.m., then the dip would be at 2 p.m. So everybody has a dip in the afternoon that's related directly to when they sleep at night. And you can calculate where your own dip would be if you just look at the hours that you keep for sleeping at night.
Yeah, it's almost like a mathematical equation, you know? I think that's really great way for people to just be able to create even their own sort of treatment plan. And I'm sure you're able to go over that if they ever consult with you. So I think everybody should definitely save this chart in whatever device or folder you have, because this is really good to look at from time to time in order to calculate when is best to sleep and potentially even nap. So now we're going to go into the resources that I would like to recommend for everyone. In order to get started, most people will consult with Dr. Google, as I like to call him. But it's unfortunate. It's a good starting point, I'm not going to lie, but it's also one that is filled with billions upon billions of results. A lot of them are advertisements, and it's hard to sort through without going through every single page for hours and hours. So I like to point people towards Medline Plus, which is a free health information database created by the largest biomedical library in the world. And this is their section on sleep disorders. And as you can see, there are no advertisements. Everything's just very nicely and aesthetically pleasing. And it can take you directly to where you want to go. So if you want to go directly to treatment and therapies for sleep disorders, you go straight down here. And I like to call this type of database a gateway database, because it basically has a bunch of links that take you to various accurate websites that will tell you that information. So Sleep Disorders and Death takes you to the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. You know, if you want to know about the medications that are associated with sleep medicine, they take you to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So it's very specific, narrowed down so that you spend less time searching on your own and just get directly to the information that you need. So definitely recommend this one for a starting point. And then we also have the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They have a whole section on sleep disorders and how to get a better night's sleep. So they have the basics about sleep, several fact sheets, and just general data and statistics. So I would definitely start there, because they also have links to other sites that I will right now begin recommending. The first one being the National Sleep Foundation. It is a nonprofit charitable organization founded in 1990. And what I like to emphasize with everybody when they look up online resources is to go directly to the About page of any health information site, because you definitely want to see the credentials and who is involved on the board and the education committees. You want to make sure that these websites that you're finding health information on is as transparent as possible as to who is providing the information within it. So that's why I added that as well into the slide, so that people can, when you start searching these websites on your own, the first thing that you do is check the About section. As I mentioned earlier, they did establish the recommended time durations for all ages in a landmark study that I will quickly show you here. It's accessible on the website, but I just provided the link here just so you don't have to search too much on it. But this is what it looks like. You can definitely read it in your own time. The Sleep Foundation, sleep time duration recommendations, the methodology, and the results summary. This is the foremost site for sleep data and polls and other quantitative data. That's where I got most of my stats from earlier in the PowerPoint. They have a lot of awareness education and media for drowsy, driving prevention, and just general sleep awareness for anyone who's an educator out there and wants to inform your school or your kids or family about it. They have information there. And it is used by medical professionals, sleep specialists, and consumers. So it's kind of like a combined kind of thing. Sorry about that. They also provide free articles for people to peruse for information, and also sleep tools such as a sleep diary, which I'll just quickly show here what that looks like. It's an 8-page sort of packet that has a whole log in here. So you start with week 1 and you record the day-to-day of the week, what time you went to bed, and you kind of self-diagnose yourself. How did you feel? How did you wake up? How long did it take? And what disturbances occur during your sleep. So this is apparently something that's common with treatments that occur for sleep disorders, is being able to use a log and be able to see what problems are happening during your sleep. So this is a free resource that is given by the National Sleep Foundation. Next, we have the American Sleep Association. I unfortunately cannot show you the website because there's a firewall on the hospital computer, but I'll just quickly summarize it here. It's founded by physician scientists in 2002, and all the credentials are clearly listed in the About page for all the contributors and reviewers on there. This website has detailed descriptions of the symptoms, assessments, and treatment options on all kinds of sleep disorders. It recommends this is one of those unique sites that actually recommends and explains the equipment used in the treatment of sleep apnea, snoring, sleep disorder breathing. They actually have a guide to sleep test studies. Again, I would show you it now, but I have the firewall on the computer. And what's interesting about this is that they do allow for questions to be posted on whatever article you look at, and for comments to be left on it. So any one of the board members on there or the people that write the articles will be able to answer any questions that you have specifically with regards to whatever article you click on the site. And next we have the Sleep Foundation, which I've mentioned several times in this presentation, because I myself am not clinically trained and I do rely on these kind of websites to learn for myself. Sleepfoundation.org is really great for that. Now, you might see a OneCare media company that might make you seem like it's not legitimate, but when you look up the Wikipedia summary of this company, it says that they license the site contact and website name from the National Sleep Foundation. So they are affiliating with the National Sleep Foundation, which is a credible source. And in the About section, all the information and product reviews are evidence-based and peer-reviewed by medical professionals that are on their advisory board. And just like on the other sites, they feature a variety of educational information on sleep topics, mental health, napping, as well as sleep disorders. And they also provide product reviews on not just the equipment for sleep disorders, but also things such as mattresses, pillows, sheets, and just anything associated with the bed. Now, I'm just gonna, and they say this on their website, but I will just put a disclaimer that they put there, that just because the first thing that you shouldn't think about when you think about improving your sleep is not so much where you sleep, but what goes on mentally and physically in your life that is affecting your sleep. I think that should be the first thing that is that you have to confront and learn about before you even select a product such as a mattress or pillow sheets, because a lot of the time people will, these things are not totally inexpensive. If I've seen the product reviews on there, but they do have a system that they describe for recommending this stuff. But I just urge people that do look at those products to think about what else is going on in their life besides, what product or new bed they should get. And then we have the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, which was established in 1975, was exclusively created for medical professionals specializing in sleep medicine. I'm sure Dr. Rothenberg is very familiar with it, but it does have a patient education section embedded in it, as well as a search engine that allows you to look for sleep centers in your area. If you put in the zip code for Greenwich, the first thing that pops up is the sleep center for Greenwich Hospital. And then it also has sleep education organized by demographic. So when you actually go on the website, it'll say This is the sleep information for parents, sleep information for educators, sleep information for patients, and sleep information for students. So it keeps in mind all the types of people that would come in and look on that website. And then they also include the tools such as the sleep diary, sleep product guide, and a sleep calculator. I think I'm actually able to access this one, so I'll just quickly show you this one. All right, so this is the patient page of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. And for some reason, it does not look right. So I'm trying to refresh the page. My apologies. This is Internet Explorer, so that might be the reason why that the homepage looks a little different. And it doesn't load as well as I'd hoped. But yeah, basically it has articles, it has those product reviews, and it's very, very easy to use. I know it doesn't look like that now, but definitely don't use Internet Explorer for that, is my recommendation. Speaking of recommendations, now we move on to books. And these are all books that Dr. Rothenberg actually recommended that I suggest, and I will be purchasing these for the library's catalog. So we have the first one here, No More Sleepless Nights. What's important about this one is if you look this up and want to get this on your own, get the revised edition that was in 1996. There is an edition that was published in 1950, but that is not the revised edition. And it is apparently a workbook that is filled with interactive quizzes, sleep logs, and self-evaluation exercises, which I really enjoy having those kind of multifunctional books where you not just read, but you actually interact with it in that way. So that's great. Next, we have the Insomnia Answer, published in 2006. And apparently in the description reads that it helps readers self-diagnose and treat themselves by offering research and solutions for the 3 different types of insomnia, which many people might not have known about. And last but not least, we have the most recent recommended book, Why We Sleep, published in 2017. And Matthew Walker is apparently pretty well known in the sleep medicine field. And he provides the latest research on how to improve your sleep and the scientific discoveries that emphasize the impact of sleeping and dreams on our health. Do you have a favorite among these, Dr. Rothenberg?
No, they're all good. So these books, the one thing I can say about these books are really all written by people who were or are leaders in the sleep field. They are highly respected researchers and clinicians, and they give you the best state-of-the-art information.
And they're pretty easy to read, right? It's you don't have they're not full of medical jargon that the normal person wouldn't understand.
That's absolutely right. They are specifically written for the general population, and they try to be as readable as possible and as accessible as possible.
Perfect. Okay. So if sleep specialists can recommend it, then I would definitely check them out. And next we have mobile app recommendations. I've been kind of specializing in involving those kind of recommendations in every single one of my webinars, because we essentially carry a tiny computer in our pockets at all times. And there's a wealth of apps that are specifically catered to the everyday health consumer. And one of these that I found particularly interesting is the CBT Coach. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a treatment that is often used in the treatment of insomnia. That's the I in it. It's developed by the US Department of Veteran Affairs. So you know that they made it specifically not with the intent of bombarding you with advertisements, selling your data. It's meant to help specifically with veterans who might be suffering from insomnia, but you don't have to be a veteran to use it. It's basically a CBT therapy manual and an educational guide. So you're not only helping with the therapy aspect, but it's also teaching you what the importance of sleep is and the cycles and all that. And like I said, it is free and with no advertisements, and you're not going to get a login page that you have to put in your email in. You don't have to worry about them taking down your information. It's not that kind of app. Next, we have Insight Timer. As we will go over in the last slide of this webinar, there is a lot of good when it comes to meditation in terms of decreasing stress, decreasing anxiety, and since that has been closely linked with insomnia and sleep disorders, it's a good thing to get into. So this meditation guide is a sleep aid, it's a yoga guide, and more. It provides free access to over 60,000 guided meditations and talks. Among all the meditation apps that I've perused and the Apple and Android stores, this is one of the most that you'll get for free. And what's great about it is that it actually has a timer inside it, embedded in it. And you can actually choose how long your duration of meditation is, even the type of sound that it makes at intervals using specific instruments. I wish I could show you, but you can definitely click the link on your handouts. And then last but not least, we have an app that was recommended to me by a addiction recovery center counselor, actually from Greenwich Hospital. I mentioned this in my previous webinar on support resources for alcohol abuse. It's called What's Up. It's a mental check-in app. Let's see if this will come up. Hopefully it will. Oh, yep, here it is. So this is what it looks like. It's called WhatsApp, and it's basically employs the same type of therapy and user interface as the CBTI coach. It is using the best of CBT and acceptance committed therapy methods to help you cope with depression, anxiety, anger, stress, and more. And as you can see just by the previews of the screenshots, it's a very easy to use, not that complicated user interface, just something that you can make into your daily routine to just check in on yourself and how you're feeling. And we have the Sleep Disorder Center at Greenwich Hospital. I'll let Dr. Rothenberg take over the slide as he is more familiar with it and what they provide.
So we've had an accredited sleep disorder center at Greenwich Hospital for over 20 years, and we treat all different types of sleep disorders in children, adolescents, and adults. As I mentioned before, there are two physicians, one adult physician, one pediatric physician, and myself, a psychologist, to treat the various different kinds of sleep problems that can occur. The sleep treatment process starts with an interview, basically, where we look at all the areas in health and life that affect sleep, how people are sleeping now, how they used to sleep, what their health is like in general. Some sleep disorders, in fact, many sleep disorders can be treated without sleep studies. Sleep and breathing problems usually require a sleep study. We now have the option of doing those sleep studies in lab or home sleep studies. And in the past year, we also have added the Zoom element to our interaction with people. So we have that feature available. But we're basically a full service sleep center, and we've been around for quite a while.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, the Zoom appointments have been pretty successful, as you mentioned. So if anybody is in need of any kind of consultation, I definitely recommend checking it out. So last but not least, we have the general tips for better sleep and overcoming insomnia. I found this very handy diagram from the National Sleep Foundation that basically uses the acronym SLEEP so that you can better remember some of these helpful tips. If you can't see it clearly, it's structure, light, electronics, exercise, and prioritize. And some of these are pretty vague. So structure is establishing a regular routine, setting the times for sleeping and waking. Light is to spend time in natural light, whether it be outdoors and inside, to avoid napping, except for young children. We talked about that earlier. You can nap in certain circumstances, but the light especially is pretty important with regards to circadian rhythm. Electronics, we did not have time, unfortunately, to go over that, but the limited use of electronics before bed to turn off electronics an hour before bed to keep the room dark and cool and ready for sleep. Then we have exercising regularly. You hear that all the time when you go to the doctor's office, but it is emphasized for a reason, because physical activity will increase your drive to sleep at night, reduce stress, and improve your mood. And then to just prioritize is just generally to reinforce the benefits of sleep with your family, and to just model all the rest of these other tips in your daily life. And I did mention that we'll go over the common treatments for insomnia, so we'll just quickly summarize that based on Dr. Rothenberg's own previous lecture. He mentioned that medications such as sleeping pills, anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants, melatonin, herbal sleep aids are examples of those medications. Cognitive behavioral therapy, though, is what seems to be primarily utilized. I'm not sure what the sleep center's take on that is, but the sleep log, sleep restriction therapy, stimulus control, and muscular cognitive relaxation were what some of those terms that Dr. Rothenberg specified. Could you actually go into a little bit of detail on what exactly some of those are? I personally do not know what sleep restrictive therapy is.
Right. So cognitive behavioral treatment for insomnia, CBTI, is really the preferable and empirically supported best treatment for chronic insomnia. In general, medications for insomnia have their role, but they tend to lose efficacy over time, whereas the benefits of cognitive behavioral treatment for insomnia improve over time. So they really are a better way to approach it. And it's cognitive behavioral therapy is a multi-component strategy that's tailored to the individual needs of the patient. So the SLEEP acronym was primarily what we call sleep hygiene recommendations, the do's and don'ts of sleeping well. Sleep logs are used to keep track of sleep so that you have a running tally of how you're doing. Sleep restriction therapy is a very effective strategy based on the principle that it's easier to fill a shorter period of time with good sleep than a longer period of time. So you start out with a reduced amount of time in bed and fill that with as much sleep as you can. And as you do better and better, you gradually increase the time in bed so that not only are you sleeping well whenever you're in bed, eventually you're sleeping as much as you need. The alternative to that, which is an older technique, which is called stimulus control instruction, was simply telling people that there's really a limit, a point of diminishing returns to how much time you can spend in bed being awake without starting to make the problem worse rather than better. So we actually have about 45 years of research on a guideline for how much time in bed awake is too much. And that would be anything more than 20 or 30 minutes. So if you're trying to sleep for more than that, it's going to get frustrating and you're going to start losing rather than gaining. And the complement to those two strategies of getting out of bed when you're not sleeping and limiting your time in bed is basically to learn how to let go of the world. And for that purpose, we use classic stress management relaxation exercises. And the interesting thing about those exercises is that even though they're only 5 minutes each, they're very effective. And the basic reason why they're effective is something that everybody listening to this webinar knows, but nobody ever thinks about. No matter how long it takes you to fall asleep or fall back to sleep, when you actually make the transition from waking to sleeping, that transition takes place so fast you can never remember it. So in fact, we all fall asleep and fall back to sleep in a split second. It can take hours to get to that moment, but you fall asleep in a split second. So if you can develop the skill, and I emphasize this is a skill, so you have to practice these exercises of letting go of the world effectively for 5 minutes, that's actually way more time than you need to fall asleep if you're doing this within that window. Remember, I mentioned that every day of your life, you have a window where your brain promotes sleep over waking. If you let go of the world within that window where your brain is promoting sleep over waking, you're asleep. And that's what the exercises are designed to help you do. So basically, we try to get people to reconnect their beds with sleep, keep regular hours so their biological clocks are working for them and not against, and learn how to let go of the world, which is kind of the linchpin for sleeping well at night.
Very informative. And it's amazing how all of these things can work in conjunction for just an individual person. Like we said, there is no one size fits all solution to sleep, unfortunately. You can only handle what you can handle. But it seems like there's treatments in place that'll work. And it really fascinates me how closely tied that cognitive behavioral treatment for sleep is very similar to, cognitive behavioral therapy utilized in any kind of psychology office, psychiatrist office. It's very closely connected, just goes to show. And to conclude this webinar, just some do-it-yourself strategies for overcoming insomnia. They kind of just highlight the helpful tips that we've been going over the whole webinar, to keep the regular sleep hours, using your bed for sleep and sex only, develop relaxation skills like we just talked about with the muscular and cognitive relaxation, get out of bed if awake for more than 20 minutes so that you can not feel that frustration, and maybe engage in something like exercise, slight exercise, of course, to get back into that state of sleep. And to go to bed later, I found this tip, but to keep a consistent wake time. That one's very interesting to me. Do you have anything to say about that, Dr. Rothenberg?
Sure. Well, that last one is essentially what sleep restriction therapy is all about. Mm-hmm. So basically, you see how much you're sleeping, and then give yourself a half an hour to an hour more time in bed than that. So the easiest way to do that is to, let's say you're sleeping 6 hours, is to figure out what a convenient wake-up time is, and then go back 7 hours. So if you're waking up at 7 a.m. every morning, you can't sleep past that, and you're only sleeping about 6 hours, then basically you would bite the bullet and go to bed at midnight. So you're in bed between midnight and 7. And then when you start sleeping more of those 7 hours, you might add another half hour in bed by going to bed earlier, like at 11:30, and then see if you could sleep from 11:30 to 7. But the quick and dirty way to improve your sleep is fix your wake up time and go to bed a little bit later than usual.
All right. So those are already just some examples that you can already try at home or recommend to others. That's what's so great about this. It's just, you don't need to go to the sleep specialist right away. You could try these on your own first. But if the problem persists, you can definitely consult somebody like Dr. Rothenberg, or visit a sleep center near you. So that, as I had imagined, that we did slightly go over time, but I will thank everybody for attending. This has been a great webinar, and I think we should all give a hand to Dr. Rothenberg for all of his incredible wealth of knowledge, and his explanations were very, very informative. I just want to point out that there will be upcoming webinars I have in the next months or so, and you can register for them for free on the website for Greenwich Hospital events, or by calling that number. I please appreciate anybody who fills out the feedback survey for this webinar, as that'll help me improve on whatever webinars that I do in the future. I know the first thing people are going to say that I should not go over time, and I apologize for that. I will work on that in the future. And this is a link also for the hospital newsletter, so that instead of waiting for the Health Extensions magazine, I noticed a lot of people put down that they found out about this from a magazine or a brochure or flyer. You can sign up, put your email in, and you'll be able to get email notifications of any upcoming webinars, not just mine, but of the whole hospital department webinars. My webinar recordings archive is in this link. This is the Dr. Stephen Mickley Community Health Resource section. Yep, so this came up, that's good. So this is what my webinar recordings look like. I will be posting the recording of this session in this section titled Where to Find Series. So the link will be down here once the recording is up and going. And that's where the conclusion will be. I'm so glad everybody stuck around for this long. I apologize again for going over time. And why don't we start with some questions? Dr. Rosenberg, you don't have to go, do you?
No.
Okay, so I'm really glad.
Here in my house.
Okay, so is there any questions that people would like to ask while we have him here? Okay, so there's someone asking me to send the charts. Okay, so I will send those, any information that was in the PowerPoint here. Somebody asked, lowest normal sleep efficiency is 80%. I think they're referring to the efficiency chart, that the circadian rhythm efficiency chart that you pointed out a couple slides ago. So is that apparently the normal sleep efficiency, the lowest apparently?
So in most research studies on insomnia, the normal sleep efficiency cutoff is 85%. So we want people to be sleeping 85% or more. And we want people to fall asleep in less than a half an hour and fall back to sleep in less than a half an hour. So those are what insomnia research usually define as the normal cutoffs.
Okay, so that will answer that person's question. I can't see names, that's why I'm saying that person. We have another question. How do you stop thinking about things when you go to bed, even if you're tired? So that's an interesting one.
So that's a great question, because it's very difficult to stop thinking about things. And in fact, if you try to stop thinking about things, you might actually wind up thinking about it more. So the successful strategy is developing the habit of thinking about something else. And that's exactly what the relaxation exercises are all about. So usually we teach people muscle breathing and imagery exercises as basically a 5-minute substitute that you practice initially out of bed, so that you get comfortable doing that. And then when you get into bed, instead of thinking about the previous day or what's coming up in the next day, you concentrate on the exercise and hopefully fall asleep in and around the time that you do the exercise. And the wonderful thing about that is that if that happens, if you fall asleep close to the time that you're doing the exercise, your brain will start to build a connection between doing that exercise and falling asleep. So then the exercise becomes a sleep promoting activity that you can do at any time of the night to either fall asleep or get back to sleep.
So that exercise could be something like maybe yoga, or like drinking a cup of tea or something. Would those be sort of those kind of things?
So one of the 3 exercises that I teach people is an ancient yoga breathing exercise called abdominal or diaphragmatic breathing. There are dozens and dozens of breathing exercises. They're probably all quite good. The thing that I would emphasize to the audience is that the value of these strategies comes from concentrating on the activity to the exclusion of everything else, basically. So that's why you do this out of bed for a little while. You practice concentrating on the exercise when there's no pressure to be successful. And what happens is you're doing the exercise and then you drift. You're thinking about dinner, or you're thinking about what you're doing tomorrow. And without getting upset that you're not thinking about the exercise, you simply come back to the exercise as many times as it takes to finish 5 minutes worth. And every time you drift off the exercise, but shift your attention back, you're basically practicing controlling the stream of thoughts in your head. And that's a skill. And that's a skill you can get better at. So when you get good enough at that skill, you can do this in bed and keep those other unwanted thoughts out of your mind.
Great suggestions, Dr. Rothenberg. And I would also add to that suggestion that if you need any kind of help with, some people like to listen to something as they're falling asleep, this Insight Timer app will definitely provide you with those free resources to listen to something else, as opposed to listening to those thoughts that you're trying to stop thinking about when you're going to bed. I've heard great reviews on this app specifically with regards to that. So if you'd rather listen to something else instead of your own thoughts, give that app a try. All right, so next question we have is, my biggest problem is waking up about 1 hour prior to what I would like to, and I start up thinking about things I have to do. How do I solve this? Would you like to take that one?
Sure. This is a very common problem. Waking up during the night is probably the most common complaint about sleep that we hear. And the solution lies in the strategy that I was just talking about. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that you have a particular exercise that you like a lot that doesn't work at the end of the night, but you're falling asleep well at the beginning of the night. So the strategy basically would be to take this activity and use it at the beginning of the night, every night as you're falling asleep easily, specifically because you're not having trouble falling asleep. So you link the activity with falling asleep easily at the beginning of the night. And after a few weeks of doing that, then you try it out at the end of the night as soon as you wake up. And one of the keys to success in that strategy is not waiting at the end of the night to see if you need to do it. You just do it as a matter of routine. So you fall asleep using the exercise at the beginning of the night. And then as soon as you wake up at the end of the night, or as soon as you come back from the bathroom, if you're an older individual, you repeat this exercise immediately when you get into bed or as soon as you wake up before you need to get up.
Yeah, so basically just practicing that routine over and over again, getting that sleep hygiene in, and just remembering all of these tips on the end of this PowerPoint slide, I think is a good way to accomplish that. So next question we have is, if you get no sleep on a given night, do you still go to bed at the same time the following night?
Great question. So usually it's better to go to bed earlier than to sleep later. And that has to do with the fact that many of us have biological clocks that tend to slide later more easily than earlier. But if you have much less sleep than usual, then your brain is actually keeping track of how much sleep you lost, and there will be increased pressure to sleep the next night, unless you worry about catching up the next night, in which case you can delay the normal catch-up night. So one of the principles of sleep regulation that should be comforting is that shorter than average sleep is followed by longer than average sleep, especially if you don't worry about getting that catch-up sleep on the next night or 2 nights later.
Hope that answered that question. That was pretty informative. So next we have, and I don't see any other questions after this, so this might be the last one. What other 2 exercises are there besides abdominal
breathing?
Yeah, that one. She wrote, the person who wrote this said it like really strangely in here. So yeah, they're referring to what you were talking about earlier, the breathing. Right. Is there any other exercises besides that?
Right. So I'll mention the 2 other exercises that I teach people, and then really importantly, a general principle. So the other 2 exercises that I use, one of them is called progressive muscle relaxation, which was an exercise developed in the United States in the 1930s that involves tensing and relaxing muscles from your head down to your toes. And believe it or not, even though it sounds pretty active, people fall asleep in my office while they're doing it. So I know that people can fall asleep using this in bed at night. The last exercise that I teach people is the non-physical exercise. It's called guided imagery. And guided imagery is simply a pleasant memory. And you use that same memory over and over again before you fall asleep to make the connection with sleep. And then after making that connection between the memory and falling asleep, you use it when you're having trouble falling asleep. But the real answer to that question, and it's a really good question, gets to the heart of how you succeed in sleeping well. And that's by distracting yourself from the very, very large number of things in life that would interfere with falling asleep. So basically, it's distraction. And I have a general guideline, because people have always asked me, well, what do you do when you're out of bed in the middle of the night? And I used to have a whole set of rules about what people should or shouldn't do. And what I discovered over the years is that one by one, people came into my office and they told me that they did exactly what I told everybody else not to do, and they fell asleep doing it. So I stopped giving out specific examples except of course for the exercises I teach people. But what I came up with was this guideline. Whenever you're awake more than you want to be, you need to find something that is distracting so that you're not thinking about what's on your mind at that moment. But the activity that you select to do should not be so engaging that the activity itself keeps you awake. So distracting but not engaging is what you're looking for. And anything that is sufficiently distracting from the myriad things in life that will keep you awake is going to help you sleep better.
Well said. Distracting, not engaging. That should be on a t-shirt or something so that people can remember it. I think that's a great slogan, I think, for the sleep center. Definitely memorable. Definitely remember that. I have another question. How many more questions can you handle, Dr. Rothenberg? I know we're heading up on the 30-minute mark.
As many as there are.
Okay, we have another one. This one's pretty specific. If you lost sleep for 1 hour the night before, the next day, 1 more hour sleep does not make up for lost sleep. Is this right? I don't know if that's comprehensible to you.
Yeah, no, actually, I think that person's onto something. And one of the most interesting studies about sleep control mechanisms was a study done with healthy normal volunteers who had their sleep reduced partially for a whole week and then given an opportunity to make up that sleep the next week in a whole week. And the question was, how much of the lost sleep would they make up? In other words, how much of the lost sleep would their brains actually keep track of? And much to everybody's surprise, the subjects, which were healthy volunteers, made up all the sleep that was lost in the past week during the course of the next week. So the answer to that question is, actually, if you lose 1 hour of sleep in a night, your brain will actually be looking for you to make up that 1 hour of sleep. Now, of course, in order to make up an hour of sleep, you have to sleep whatever your body requires. So if you're an 8-hour sleeper and you only sleep 7, the next night, if you slept 9, you would be completely caught up because you would average out to 8 for those 2 nights. So your brain actually is looking for exactly that amount of sleep going forward. Now, that of course has limits. The research only supports 1 week. And I've seen people, based on how much sleep they've lost, would have to sleep for the rest of their lives to catch up. So I know that there are limits to how much sleep you can catch up. But right now, your brain keeps track for at least a week and looks for all of that sleep back. And it's not just last night. It could be 2 nights ago, 3 nights ago, 4 nights ago. Your brain still wants the sleep back.
Yeah, so it can turn into a cycle of catch up, which would you say that it's imperative that people kind of work their schedule around sleep if that's the case, and sort of like sacrifice any other thing they would have done that night in order to make up for that lost hour?
So, sleep is very much a question of priority in one's life. And people, one of my great soapboxes is that I want people to value sleep because of all the good things it does for you. It optimizes biology, immune system, hormones, cognitive function, and emotional stability. So I want people to get a whole night's sleep. And you don't have to catch up all in one night. It's probably better not to catch up all in one night. So actually, if you lost an hour or 2 of sleep, you could make that up by getting an extra 15 to 30 minutes of sleep. And that might even be better over the course of 2 or 3 days afterwards. So not to feel pressured to catch up immediately. So there's very little harm to losing a few hours of sleep infrequently. And you will catch up if you don't worry about it in a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah, and that 30-minute mark works perfectly with what you said should be the equivalent of a nap, a sufficient nap that we talked about earlier. So that works out great. We have another question that just came up. If sleep is caused by RLS or pain, how does getting out of bed help? I'm not sure what RLS is.
It's restless leg syndrome.
Restless leg syndrome, right? Okay. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a little bit of a complicated question because restless leg syndrome is a neurological disorder where people become very uncomfortable in the evening, and it's especially noticeable when they're still. So when they're lying in bed, the symptoms of restless leg syndrome become very intense in some people. And actually, what people used to do, because they discovered it, empirically, is that when they got out of bed and walked around, the symptoms would go away. However, that doesn't solve the sleep problem. And if a person had restless legs syndrome, they should clearly discuss it with their doctor because there's very effective medication for that disorder. So the idea is, basically, if I'm understanding the question correctly, you don't want to lie in bed feeling distinctly physically uncomfortable. So it's better to get out of bed and preserve the connection between the bed and sleep and get into bed when you can feel comfortable. But if a person genuinely has these uncomfortable feelings in the evening repeatedly, they should talk to a health professional about getting treatment for it.
Yeah, it seems like it's the kind of thing that would need medication if there's some kind of pain associated with it. So I think you're right about that. How does getting out of bed? And yeah, it's just, I think what the person asking the question meant was just because we keep saying if we want them to stay in bed or get out of bed if they can't fall asleep within 20 minutes. I think that's what he or she was referring to. So
right, so let me make a comment about that, because that's really an essential point in sleeping better. And you can do this on your own at home, so everybody at home can implement this strategy. When you apply this sort of rule of thumb that you're not going to lie in bed awake for more than 20 or 30 minutes, if you implement that, you immediately do two very helpful things for sleeping better. One is you immediately eliminate the connection between the bed and hours of not sleeping. And that's very helpful. The second thing is you're actually preserving the connection between the bed and all the sleep that you do get in bed, even if it's in pieces. So by getting out of bed after a fixed amount of time, you both preserve the connection between the bed and sleep, you're rebuilding the connection between the bed and sleep, and you're eliminating the connection between the bed and hours of frustration and not sleeping.
I think that pretty much covered the whole question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for all these questions. These are really great. And Dr. Rothenberg is clearly able to handle them, whether they're broad or specific. So is there any other questions? It seems like Dr. Rothenberg can go all night if he has to. So definitely take the chance if you still have any questions. We still have 14 attendees. So if any of these 14 attendees have a question, please feel free to ask. Cool. We're clearly in the presence of a very knowledgeable source. So going once, going twice. It can take a little bit for people to type, so I can understand that. But as it is coming up past 8:30, if there's no more questions, I think we can conclude for the evening. I do have our contact information up here, my email. You can make appointments with me in person or virtual from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And Dr. Rothenberg, is this the proper email and number to reach you if somebody would like to have a consult with you?
Yes, and I would also ask people to write down the Sleep Disorder Center telephone number, which is 203-863-3167.
Oh, okay, yep.
We
So
had that on the first slide, so it's in the webinar.
Okay, I think it's in the sleep disorder one slide. Yeah, it's this one, correct? Okay,
yes,
yep. So
that's the main number. And regardless of what type of sleep problem that is, Katya, who is the secretary at the Sleep Disorder Center, can direct you to the right professional to deal with that problem.
All right, great. I think that's a great place to wrap up then. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Rothenberg, for joining us tonight. And thank you all for attending. Again, this was the largest amount of attendees for a live session, and I really, really appreciate it. I've only been doing these for a year, and I hope to continue doing more of them. And we certainly hope to see Dr. Rothenberg at some point in the near future. So with that, everybody, hopefully you all have a good night. Thank you.